The narrowing. For more than 20 years, I've had a name for something I kept seeing and nobody else seemed to talk about. I call it the Great Narrowing. Human faces are changing. Jaws are shrinking. Teeth don't fit. Bones are lighter than they've ever been in the history of our species. And the strangest part isn't that it's happening. The strangest part is that it was documented, photographed, measured, published almost 90 years ago. And then it was forgotten. This is that story. And I promise you, every claim in this video has a source on screen. The pattern we stopped seeing. Start with what's around you. Crowded teeth. Braces as a rite of passage. So normal we throw them into coming-of-age movies. Wisdom teeth scheduled for surgery like a tax you pay at 19. In the US alone, about 10 million wisdom teeth come out every year. More than half of children worldwide have some degree of malocclusion, teeth that don't line up. It's ranked the third most widespread oral health problem on Earth. And we treat all of it as normal, as just human. Here's my claim, and I'll spend the next half hour earning it. It is not normal. It's recent, it's mostly environmental, and a man you've never heard of watched it happen in real time. First, what a mouth is for. Before the evidence, one idea that changes how you see everything after it. Your mouth is not just a food mill, it's a social organ. Look at your front teeth. Flat, even, benign. Every other ape carries projecting canines, weapons, and advertisements of weapons. Ours stand down into line, and that change shows up millions of years back. In Ardipithecus, Darwin himself read it as selection against aggression. Now think about what a smile actually is. Primatologists trace it to something called the silent bared teeth display, showing your teeth precisely to prove you won't use them. In chimpanzees, that display measurably reduces aggression. A smile is a disarmament inspection, and you pass one every time you greet somebody. You already know this in your gut. Give a movie villain one feature, a mouth full of points, and no dialogue is needed. That unease is ancient wiring. So hold this thought. When something degrades the human mouth, it isn't degrading a tool. It's degrading the organ we make peace with. The skulls say it wasn't always so. So, was it always like this? Dig up the answer. Pre-industrial skulls from any continent overwhelmingly show broad arches, straight teeth, and wisdom teeth that erupted and worked. Tooth decay was so rare that in the 1930s, archaeologists treated a cavity as evidence a skull wasn't ancient. In the Swiss village of Naders, there's an ossuary holding some 20,000 skeletons, centuries of teeth, sitting sound in their sockets, while the recently buried lay riddled with decay. One researcher examined 1,276 skulls from ancient Peru and found not a single one with the deformity pattern that's routine in modern mouths. And it's been checked since. A 2007 study found medieval Norwegian skulls have significantly better bites than living Norwegians. The skulls don't lie. Something changed. Recently. The man who went looking. That researcher was Weston Price. Born on a farm in Newburgh, Ontario in 1870, dentist by 23, he built a Cleveland practice with a chemistry lab upstairs, analyzing food samples mailed in from around the world. By 1915, he had over 150 published papers and he'd become the founding director of dentistry's first great research institute, the research arm of the body that became the American Dental Association. He chaired it from 1914 to 1928, directing 60 scientists with Charles Mayo, yes, that Mayo, on his advisory board. Hold that in your head. This was not a fringe figure. This was the man at the summit of organized dentistry during the very years it taught the world to brush. Which makes what he did next remarkable. He decided the answer to degeneration wouldn't be found in diseased mouths. It would be found in whatever healthy mouths still possessed. So he and his wife Florence spent the 1930s traveling to the last corners of the world untouched by modern commerce. And the healthiest mouths he found belonged to people who had never seen a toothbrush. His conclusion wasn't that hygiene is worthless. It's that hygiene was never the lever. The method: living controls. Here's the genius of the study design, and I want you to appreciate it because his critics never did. In every region, Price found two groups of the same people, same ancestry, same genes. One still eating their traditional diet, and one at the point of contact with imported white flour, sugar, and canned goods. Each population served as its own control. And he did it 14 times. Alpine Swiss, Gaelic Islanders in the Hebrides, Inupiat and Yupik in Alaska, First Nations across northern Canada, Seminole in Florida, Melanesians, Polynesians across 8 archipelagos, the Maasai, Kikuyu, Wakamba, and others in Africa, Aboriginal Australians, Torres Strait Islanders, Maori, Peruvians on the coast, in the Andes, in the Amazon. Every latitude, every altitude, every ancestry. Same result every time. The isolated thrived. The modernized, and above all their children, deteriorated on cue. Whatever was doing this did not care about race. It tracked the food. First finding: teeth rot on the new food. The numbers first, because they're brutal. These are cavities per 100 teeth examined in Swiss communities in 1931 and 32. Communities separated by little more than a road. Ayer, isolated, living on rye bread and alpine dairy, 2.3 per 100. Visois, at the roadhead, with white flour, jam, and sugar, 20.2. St. Moritz, the resort town, fully modern diet and toothbrushes, 29.8. Nearly 1 tooth in 3 attacked. Across all 14 regions, Price measured an average 35-fold increase in decay when the food changed, while brushing was essentially absent in the immune groups. Harvard's top physical anthropologist, Ernest Houghton, summed it up in 1937. It is store food that has given us store teeth. Second finding: the face itself changes. But decay was the least of it. Look at these photographs. These are Price's actual plates. On the left, children of the traditional diet Swiss valleys. Broad dental arches, wide nostrils, room for every tooth. On the right, children of the same nation in a modernized district. Rampant decay, and underneath it, something worse. Narrowed arches, crowded teeth, an underdeveloped middle face. Notice what kind of change that is. That's not damage to bone that formed correctly. That's bone that formed differently, and it appeared in the first generation born after the parents' diet changed. Price wrote it directly under this photograph. This deformity is not due to heredity. The control no lab could build: families. And then he found the evidence that should have ended the argument. Families. Fathers with broad, well-built faces, and their own sons, born after the household diet changed, without them. Older siblings normal. Younger siblings, conceived after modernization, narrowed. Every time in the same direction, ordered by the calendar. Same two parents, same house. Unmixed ancestry, which Price verified specifically because he knew the objection was coming. Think about what that rules out. Whatever did this arrived between one pregnancy and the next. And the only thing that changed between those pregnancies was what was on the table. Price's explanation: intercepted heredity. So what was his explanation? And this is where Price gets genuinely radical, much more radical than eat your vitamins. He argued the injury is set before birth. The new foods deplete the parents, both parents, of minerals and what he called the fat-soluble activators, vitamins A and D, and a third factor he could measure but not name, which he called activator X. Depleted parents mean compromised germ cells and a compromised pregnancy. The child's blueprint is fine. Its expression gets intercepted. That was his phrase, intercepted heredity. And he had receipts. In Texas in the 1930s, a researcher named Fred Hale deprived sows of vitamin A before mating. Just the mothers, just before and around conception. And got 59 piglets across 6 litters born without eyeballs. 1 dose of cod liver oil before mating, and the eyes partially came back. Parental deficiency alone, deforming offspring structure. Price pointed at birth order. Later children of a depleting mother fare worst. He pointed at tribal customs. Cultures all over the world fed special foods to both prospective parents, in some cases for 6 months before a marriage was even permitted. He even attributed wisdom tooth problems to the parents' vitamin A status. And underneath it all, Chapter 20 of his book, Depleted soil grows depleted food, which builds depleted parents. Remember that chapter. It's coming back. He saw the objections coming. Price knew exactly what would be said, because it was already being said. It's race mixing. Except it appears in unmixed groups, in the first generation after the food changes. It's heredity. Big teeth from one parent, small jaw from the other. Except the same two parents produce both normal and narrowed children, sorted by the date the family's diet changed. It's thumb-sucking, mouth-breathing, bad sleeping habits. Except the deformity shows up in infants, before the habits. Mouth-breathing follows a narrowed airway. It doesn't cause it. It's poverty. Except it struck the prosperous modernized and spared the poorest isolated. But there was one objection he couldn't answer in 1939, and honesty requires we say it. He had no controlled experiment separating his variables. The food that lost its minerals had also gone soft. That test came later, and mostly from his critic's side of the field. Price died in 1948, unfashionable and fading. But everything checkable in his work was eventually checked, mostly by people who never read him. Here's how it came out. First, the honest ledger. Before I show you the vindication, let's do the audit, because a case this strong doesn't need protecting from its own weaknesses. What doesn't hold up? It was observational fieldwork. No blinding, no randomization, and photographs can be selected. His talk of injured germplasm sounded like discredited biology to mid-century geneticists. His 1930s vocabulary, primitive races, stocks, aged terribly and made him unquotable. And Activator X went unidentified in his lifetime. What survives? The core pattern. Skeletal and dental deterioration within one generation of dietary change, independent of ancestry. The prenatal timing, the vitamin A mechanism, and the soil chapter. Every item on that second list was later confirmed. Watch. Vindication 1. The Occlusal Transition. 1984. The flagship journal of orthodontics, an anthropologist named Robert Corricini publishes evidence of what he calls an epidemiologic transition in dental occlusion. Crooked teeth rise with urbanization, at the speed of urbanization. That's the signature of environment, not genes. He documented it in rural Kentucky, in Punjab, in Bengal, among the Pima in Arizona, traditionally raised elders with sound bites, and their own children raised on soft, modern food without them. Among all the dietary variables he tested, the toughness of the food was the single best predictor. The typical transition time from good occlusion to bad across a population? 1 to 2 generations. Rediscovered, measured, mainstream, and structurally identical to what Price photographed 50 years earlier, with no citation back. Vindication 2. The Controlled Experiments. And the experiment Price never ran? His critics ran it. Feed animals identical nutrients, same vitamins, same minerals, but make one group's food soft and the other's hard. And the soft food group develops crooked teeth and narrowed arches. It's been shown in primates, rodents, hyraxes, mini pigs. So chewing load during growth is real. That's lever 1, isolated in the lab. Meanwhile, Price's own mechanism was quietly entering the veterinary textbooks. Maternal vitamin A deficiency causes birth defects in pigs and cattle, including abnormal development of the bones of the skull. Hale's pigs were no fluke. So now there are 2 levers, both proven, both environmental. Science took Price's bundle apart, and nothing in the unbundling rescued the theory both levers replaced. The theory that it was just heredity. Vindication 3. The whole skeleton. And it's not just the jaw. In 2015, researchers CT scanned the spongy interior of limb bones, trabecular bone, across millions of years of the human line, and published in one of the world's top journals. Bone density stayed high through every fossil human they measured, and collapsed only in recent settled populations. Modern humans carry 50 to 75% less of this bone density than chimpanzees. Foragers held it. Farmers lost some. We lost the most. The main driver is mechanical loading, the moving, carrying, chewing body, with nutrition setting the material budget. Loss of proper bone structure and mass isn't a claim anymore. It's a measured fact of the skeletal record. The wisdom tooth ledger. Now, back to those 10 million extractions. In rural Nigeria, on a tough, fibrous traditional diet, 1.1% of wisdom teeth are impacted. In urban Nigeria, same country, same people, soft diet, 10.7%. That gap opens within a generation. Meanwhile, worldwide, About 22% of people never form at least one wisdom tooth at all. And here's a detail that should give the "it's genetics" crowd pause. That missing tooth rate runs highest in East Asia, around 30%. So a full set of working wisdom teeth marks a jaw that grew to size, not a genetic gift of any particular ancestry. Price said parental vitamin A. Modern science says undergrown arches plus tooth number genetics. They probably share the truth. But either way, hear this clearly. Impaction is a mismatch we manufacture and then bill for. The synthesis, 3 levers. So let me give you the whole model because it's cleaner than either side's version. 3 levers on one skeleton. Lever 1, the foundation. Nutrition of both parents, before conception and through pregnancy. That sets the congenital pattern before the child eats a single meal. That's Price's core claim. Lever 2, the material. Minerals and fat-soluble vitamins through childhood. They build the enamel, the density, the growth plates. That's Price's chemistry. Lever 3, the load. Chewing, breastfeeding mechanics, carrying, walking. That tells the arch how wide and the bone how dense to build. That's the lever Price missed, his critics' lasting contribution. All 3 are environmental, which means all 3 are choices, made for most of us before we could chew. The immigrant key. If you want the single cleanest proof that this is environment and not ancestry, here it is. Meet an adult raised in a village on tough, mineral-dense food, broad arch, wisdom teeth in working service. Their children, born in Toronto or Chicago into the soft industrial diet, end up in the orthodontist chair like everyone else's kids. Nothing racial was preserved or lost. A developmental environment was. Price photographed this in every population he visited. Corricini measured it. And notice, it cuts both ways. No ancestry is safe, and none is doomed. Every generation gets a fresh vote. Now I show you where this science never died. Because wherever a skeleton carries a price tag, none of this was ever controversial. Exhibit A, Pottinger's Cats. 1932 to 42. A doctor named Francis Pottinger feeds roughly 900 cats identical rations, one group raw, one group cooked. The cooked meat lines slide generation by generation. Stillbirths, low birth weights, fragile and deformed skeletons, failing reproduction. Now, Pottinger's framing, raw food, was wrong, and his later fans took it to strange places. But his inference was exact. Something essential and heat-sensitive was being destroyed in the cooking. 40 years later, feline research found it. Taurine, destroyed by heat. Every deficiency sign Pottinger recorded now maps, condition for condition, onto documented taurine deficiency. And today, the National Research Council sets a cat's taurine requirement to the milligram. 400 per kilogram of diet. 500 for pregnant queens. Observation validated. Mechanism renamed. Originator forgotten. Remember the shape of that story, because you're watching it happen to Price. Exhibit B, Fetal Programming. Ask a rancher why a calf grew wrong, and he does not say genes and shrug. There is an entire modern scientific field, it's called developmental programming or fetal programming, documenting how a cow's nutrition before and around conception and through pregnancy sets her calf's muscle, bone, organs, and lifetime performance, partly by regulating the calf's genome epigenetically. There's a meta-analysis pooling 35 studies on prenatal diet and calf outcomes. University Extension Services teach this to producers as routine herd management. Now read that field's founding definition next to Price's intercepted heredity and try to find the daylight. There isn't any. There's a 60-year gap and a missing citation. Exhibit C, the Vitamin A Ledger. Want to see nutritional science with real enforcement behind it? Open the Nutrient Requirements of Beef Cattle 8th edition. Vitamin A. Feedlot cattle, 2,200 international units per kilogram of feed. Pregnant cows, 2,800. Lactating cows and breeding bulls, 3,900. A separate, higher number for pregnancy. And one for the fathers. Printed. Revised for 80 years. Enforced by economics. And when a drought year strips the nutrients from stored feed and somebody skips it, the textbook consequences arrive on schedule. Stillbirths, weak calves, congenital blindness, malformed skull bones. Outbreak reports still get published, today. Hale's Pigs, Price's Chapter 18. Standard veterinary medicine, for animals with owners. Exhibit D, $1,000,000 skeletons. The pattern holds anywhere bone is the asset. Horses, developmental bone disease in expensive foals triggered copper studies across Ohio and Kentucky stud country, revisions to official copper recommendations, and supplementation trials in pregnant mares. Copper-starved lambs develop osteoporosis. Copper-deficient farmed deer develop joint disease. When the skeleton is worth $1 million, trace minerals get budget lines. And chickens. About 30% of caged-laying hens break a bone in their lifetime. So poultry science runs a permanent research program on bone-breaking strength. Calcium levels, calcium particle size, phosphorus, vitamins D and K, exercise. Bone quality, engineered to the gram, for a $4 bird. So understand, the question is not whether skeletons can be built by nutrition and load. That question is settled, wherever it pays. Exhibit E, the soil map. And now Price's least respectable chapter, the soil, gets its revenge. Every one of these names on screen is a regional livestock disease named by farmers who watched their animals waste away. Bush sickness, New Zealand. Coast disease, South Australia. Cobalt pine, Scotland. Salt sickness, Florida. Grand Traverse disease, Michigan. Nakaruitis, Kenya. Every single one turned out to be the soil itself, deficient in cobalt or copper or selenium. New Zealand's pumice country was nearly impossible for sheep and cattle until they started top-dressing the pastures with cobalt. White mussel disease vanished from lambs in the 1950s with selenium. Today, deficiency risk is mapped with geostatistics from regional soil chemistry, and the fix goes on the field, not just the animal. Depleted soil, depleted feed, depleted creatures. Chapter 20 became a branch of agronomy. Nobody sent Price the memo. The knowledge was never lost. Look where it was applied. The double standard. Put the two ledgers side by side and let yourself actually feel this one. The herd gets nutrient targets for mothers and fathers before conception. pregnancy-specific vitamin and mineral requirements revised continuously for 80 years. Soil that's tested, mapped, and amended. And when an animal comes out deformed, it's treated as a management failure, with a cause. The public gets prenatal advice compressed to folic acid and eat a balanced diet. Dietary guidance fought over by industry and ideology for a century. Soil quality invisible at the point of sale. And crooked teeth, collapsed arches, and fragile bones filed under genetics and bad luck, and then billed. Braces, extractions, implants, hip pins. This is the precise sense in which I say we got ripped off, not by a conspiracy, by an asymmetry. Where an underbuilt skeleton costs its owner money, this science was adopted ruthlessly. Where it costs the person themselves, decades later, dispersed, deniable, it sat on the shelf. Ask a rancher whether a cow's diet before conception shapes her calf skeleton. He won't even recognize it as a question. Why you've never heard of him. So why don't you know Price's name? No suppression required. Something quieter, and in a way, worse. Start with the asymmetry of effort. His dataset cost a decade, 14 regions, thousands of photographic plates. The dismissals cost a paragraph. Its heredity was asserted as the default, never demonstrated. Corricini later leveled exactly that charge at his own field. Then Price's earlier root canal research collapsed under review in the 1940s, and everything carrying his name got tarred with it. His vocabulary became unquotable. The foundation bearing his name hitched his data to raw milk crusades that made academics allergic to the citation. And then, the core findings were rederived under new names: occlusal transition, evolutionary mismatch, developmental programming, with no trail leading back. The record wasn't erased. It was orphaned. And I want to be careful here, because it matters for how this story gets told. A suppression narrative can't be documented, and it invites easy dismissal. The orphaning can be documented on every slide you've just seen. And note who never needed convincing. The feed industry ran the numbers on its own animals, adopted the whole framework, and never once cited the debate. What the evidence actually supports doing. So what do you do with this? 3 levers, 3 practices. The foundation. Nutrient-dense food for both prospective parents before conception and through pregnancy. Minerals and the fat-soluble vitamins from real food. That's the one window Price called non-negotiable, and it's the one that cattle literature now guards to the international unit. The material. Children built from mineral-rich whole foods instead of displacement calories. The traditional diets Price analyzed carried several times the minerals and fat-soluble vitamins of the American diet of his day. The load. Breastfeeding's oral workout where possible. Food that requires actual chewing all through childhood. And load-bearing movement for life. The skeleton keeps what it's asked to carry. And the obvious caveat, said plainly, this is education from the historical and scientific record. It is not medical advice. Your pregnancy, your kid, your health. Those decisions belong with your own practitioners. Open questions. Now let me say the open questions before a skeptic says them for me, because overstating this case is exactly how it got orphaned the first time. Activator X, plausibly vitamin K2, argued in detail, not proven. Adult reversibility. The mewing people have outrun their evidence. Childhood is where the leverage is. The mix. How much foundation versus material versus load in any given face? Unresolved. All three are real. The proportions aren't settled. Price's most mocked claim, injury to the father's germ cells, is quietly becoming a funded research field in human sperm epigenetics. Early, but growing. And here's my favorite open question, one nobody has touched. No controlled study has ever morphed tooth sharpness on a human face and measured perceived threat or trust. Dentists have been designing smiles around that assumption since the 1950s, on pure intuition. The experiment is cheap, obvious, and waiting for someone to run it. Close. The blueprint is intact. Let me end where Price ended, because hidden inside his gloomy word degeneration is the most hopeful finding in the whole book. What was lost in one generation was never lost in the germline. Price wrote that the outlook is poor for the affected individual, but not for that individual's descendants. Restore the conditions, and the next generation is built to the old pattern. The narrowing is not a fate. It's not a bloodline. It is an environment, and environments can be changed. Sources. Everything I've claimed tonight is on this slide and in the description. Price's full book with every photograph is free online, public domain, and I've linked the anthropology, the bone density scans, and the livestock literature so you can check me. That's the point of all this. Don't take my word for it. Take the skulls. This has been The Great Narrowing. Thanks for watching.